Welcome to Galaxy Advisors. The purpose of this video is to explain from a user's point of view, how does Condor work? I'm not going to look at a technical or programming point of view, but more or less, how do you interact with the program? And I'm going to define for you 4 stages of inquiry. So everything begins with your area of interest. And what we're going to use Condor for is to explore that area of interest. Now, how does Condor work? Well, to answer that question, really, Condor enables a user to explore their area of interest through a series of user-completed forms across 4 broad stages of inquiry: data harvesting, filtering, visualizing, and exporting. Condor has lots of forms, over 14 major forms. Now, that's a lot of forms and subforms, but I'm going to categorize those and group those to give you a pretty good feel for how to use Condor. Ultimately, there are 3 primary programs that work. First, the Condor program is in the foreground that the user uses to select menus, items, and completes forms for data harvesting, filtering, visualizing, and exporting. The second program is the MySQL program, which is really in the background and is used for data storage. And the third program is the Navicat program, which is really a supplemental program used for accessing the MySQL server and stored databases, tables, and for running queries, and for importing and exporting data. Conceptually, we might say here's how the 3 work together. At the very bottom, you have the database, the MySQL database, where it's stored everything. Condor with its template, which, from the outward standpoint is pretty simple. However, buried underneath that is some really complexity and sophisticated options for your analysis. And ultimately, you're generating some network diagrams, some measuring, some trends, and as well as the ability to analyze content and the ability to export some of those measures and data directly from Condor. Also, you can use Navicat to directly access the MySQL server and the tables and actually export the data from that as well. So recall that there's really kind of 3 process steps. You start by using the tools that gives you access to data harvesting across 6 major categories: the web, mail, Wikipedia, Twitter, Facebook, and video. After you're done harvesting, you use the file command to open that specific database and its corresponding data sets. And then you spend most of your time with the view command to visualize and measure and to analyze the content. Now, today I'm going to basically summarize and say that to understand how Condor works, you need to understand some basic social network concepts and terms such as nodes, links, steps, degree, density, betweenness, core, peripheral, weak and strong ties, etc., and what each of the forms do at each stage of inquiry. Now, I'm not going to go into the basic social network concepts. I'll leave that to something later, or most of you already know that. I'm going to spend most of the time here on the forms. So let's look at the Condor forms and what they enable a user to do. As I mentioned before, Condor enables a user to explore their area of interest across 4 broad stages of inquiry. The first stage is really the harvesting stage. Again, you have tools that help you harvest across 6 areas: the web, mail, Wikipedia, Twitter, Facebook, and video, and a few more, but those are the major 6 forms. Then the second stage, once you have those data set, you're into filtering. And there's really 2 steps and 3 to 4 forms and subforms that you use to kind of filter that data that will generate a network map, which takes you to the third stage of visualizing. At the third stage, when you have a network map, you're going to use 4 menu items and submenus to further refine your analysis. And then finally, in the 4th stage, the optional exporting. You can export directly from Condor, or you can use Navicat to go back to the very raw data that you've captured in the first stage and export it as well. Now, what I'm going to do is to expand these 4 stages in a little more detail and then take you through each one of those. The very first stage, you might say, for the harvest is really 2 kinds of options that are involved when you're looking at these forms. There's search options that you can include for your area of interest of words, phrases, URLs, locations that have geocodes, user IDs. Then the second kind of option that this forms are results, that you can limit it to the top number of nodes, number of steps or links away from a user or from Twitter users and so on, and an option to collect the content or not. So that would really kind of the broad base of what goes on in the first stage. Then the second stage is more complex and involves really kind of two steps. In the view command, there's 3 to 4 forms and subforms. The step 1 is really, you can set the time constraints, you can set content constraints. I only want to retrieve a network that contains certain nodes or between certain times. You can refine it by combining email address or combining or deleting the search web terms or Twitter terms. You can filter by a special attribute that you might have calculated, or actually weight different properties of the network. If you chose the dynamic communication view, you then have the option to set a time unit of day, month, or year. You can choose a history or no history. You can set a decay speed, and you can also add other attributes. And then the second step, you have a waiting form for Betweenness centrality, and you have another form that comes up that gives you an option to select the top number of nodes. So again, this stage is to help you filter at a number of different options by time, content, and so on for your ultimate map. Then in stage 3, you'll actually get a visualized network. And there you have another series of 4 to 5 menu options and subforms. If you chose dynamic, you have a play option. The second major form is a measure menu that gives you 14 measures and 7 export measures. There's a view menu that gives you 13 choices, a bipartite menu that gives you 7 more choices, and a control menu of 5 more. So you can see there's a lot of sophistication, a lot of options as you go through the third stage. Then finally there's a fourth stage, what I call the optional export stage. Here you really can use the third stage of the menu measure options and export it from the network map, or you can use Navicat directly all the way back to the first stage and directly link and access the databases with Navicat. And you can use that with then, once you've exported the data, with statistical packages such as a statistical package for the social science or SPSS, Excel, or your other favorite stat pack, other semantic programs such as Wordage or LIWC, which stands for Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. And finally, you could use it with other social network programs such as UCINet, Multinet, and a host of others. So this provides a broad overview of the forms, and now what I'm going to do is to go through each stage one at a time to give you even finer detail. So if you look at the first stage, again, there are 6 broad program areas, and we can look at the web collector, which gives you 12 different options in setting what type of API you want to collect between Google, Google News, Bing, Big Search, Big News, options to inquiry your query, URLs for the query. You can set in actually a geocode around the area, and then again limit the results to the top number of nodes, number of steps, and collecting the content. For the mail collector, there's really kind of 9 different options, and you can use the how to import email for Condor mail collector video to explain those. We have the wiki search, which uses actually 2 forms, a fetcher with 12 options and a rating with 10 different algorithms of the content that you've already collected from the first step in fetcher. And for more detail on those, the Condor Tools Wiki Search example 1. The wiki evolution is another form with 9 different options, and for more details on those options, see Condor Tools Wiki Evolution example 1. There's the Facebook, which is probably the most simplest. One option is to enter in your Facebook ID to collect that network. Again, see Condor Tools Facebook example 1. The Twitter collector has 11 different options that gives you an option of the time collection, follower collections, the query, number of different options for geocoding, and options again on the results. So we'll see Condor Twitter example 1 for those. The Condor video gives you 7 options for a type of query, and other research results options. So that gives you an idea of the first aspect of the 6 harvesting options. Now we're going to go to the view command. Now the view is probably the most complex command. I'm not going to cover everything here. I'm just going to cover the communication and the static and the dynamic. I will not cover the term documents, hierarchical, and email analysis. That will take a whole nother video. But for the most part, the two that you use the most are communication and the create communication view and the static dynamic, which I will cover. So again, we're going to talk about the second step here in the stage and what happens when you filter and use the filtering forms at the second stage. If you could again recall the view communication, create communication view, and that will bring up this option. There's 7 different options. The first one was to view all selected data sets. That's the default setting. Record view loading process. Sometimes you can check that, and actually to speed things up for the second time you look at your rendering, you can record the steps so that you don't have to repeat those again. You can set time constraints, you can refine the site, you can refine the data frequency of communication, filter by attribute score, and weight different networks. So let's look at these 7 options one at a time. For recording view loading, basically if you check that, you're going to get another menu that's open to save the file. You can then reuse this file to shorten the time for playback. The set time constraints, if you check that, it's going to bring up this additional form where you can set the time, between the times or time since. You can select a different type of actor, communication from or to, or only from and to. You can actually then subset the network by a specific keyword or words. If you click refine, if you're doing email, you have the ability to refine email address, because often, for example, people have more than one email address that might be in here, and you say, well, I need to consolidate those. You can, or you want to delete certain anonymous or peripheral email addresses. If you're doing a web search, a Twitter search, you might want to remove the Twitter search terms, and it gives you ability then to remove those or to rename them. Under the refine actors by communication frequency, for example, in email, you might want to say, well, I only want to look at actors that have 2 or more, 3 or more communications with one another. So it gives you an ability to kind of subset it by the intensity of the communication. Filter by attribute score. This is another sophistication within Condor, that you might have certain attributes that you've added that you can subset the network. And you can also, if you have multiple data sets, decide to weight one data set more or another. Now, if you have a selection, if you select a dynamic view of communication, you can set a time unit by day, month, or year. You can choose a time window, width history, fast decay, other temporal attributes as well. And now if you click on the weighted Betweenness, which is another form that automatically will come up, you can do plain weighting or no weighting, which is the most common. You can actually choose to weight it, or weight it by favor of weak ties, or weight it in favor of strong ties. Now, a weak tie is 2 steps or more away from a central node, and a strong tie is typically considered those that are direct linkage. Another form for top nodes that comes up under the view is select top nodes. You might decide by Betweenness, and here it was an example of 621 nodes, and I only want to say the top 100 or top 50. So it's going to select only those by that Betweenness centrality score, which is another form. So all these options under the view are to subset the network before that network map is rendered. So now at stage 3, you actually get a visualization based upon those forms that you've gone through. And then at the network map stage, there's 4 to 5 menu options and subforms. And the major ones are play, if you selected dynamic, measure, which gives you 14 measures and 7 export measures. View menu, which gives you 13 more choices. Bipartite, 7 more choices. Control, 5 choices. So you can see the degree of sophistication embedded underneath that very elegant interface structure. So let's take a look at this third stage one at a time. When you click on the measure, just to give you a contrast between static view and dynamic view, the top portion of the menus are identical, and then static gives you just 2 export measures, which is in contrast, dynamic gives you considerably more. And let's kind of go through these. I'll go through the dynamic because it would cover the static at the same time. So if you selected dynamic, you're going to get a play animation or a pause animation, and you're also going to get a slider beneath it to kind of slide along by the time frame. It's going to give you a core peripheral option, and that is going to then make a calculation. So once you click on that, you click calculate. After a little bit of time, it'll come back and give you a measure of that core fitness value. Then under the link prediction, it gives you 5 choices, so you can choose what type of prediction that you want. It will then choose what kind of domain you want to access, edu, com, and so on. You'll have the ability to draw that out and show those links in the link prediction. You can then see what links by predicted score. And then you can adjust that and actually cancel the link prediction. When you look under the average response time, actually it's a 2-step. You first click average response time, calculate art, and then after it's calculated, you come back and click on measure average response time, and then you'll see the color by art, show by art, and export by art are now available for your choosing. Now when you select on the table, it's going to give you this table. Here it represents by the email address, the average response time, and the number of emails that's based on calculation. You can save those, so a window is going to open and give you basically save one, and you can actually color the graph by the average response time. Contribution index, this is one of my favorites. It gives you the ability to look at the people who are only sending email, very at the top. If you only send email, you have a 1. If you both send and receive, you're around the 0 mark. If you just receive, you're at the -1. And at the very bottom, it's going to give you the number of emails that are involved in this case, and then a slider that you can have in a dynamic, and you can watch this then by the contribution index over time. You can then have an actor sentiment. A contribution is a count of the number of positive and negative based upon the content. The important thing is that you first have to click View, Prepare Sentiment View. You select the sentiment analysis. Once it's done, it's going to give you a measure finished calculating. Then you can come back and say visualize sentiment contribution index and actually see that by individual user. Another measure under the visualize view command is group centrality and group density. You can see those 3 measures here. Again, by selecting dynamic view, you can see how those measures vary over time. You can take a look at the new user plot, and it tells you by the number of time that you selected by day, month, or year, the number of users that came in during that time period. This is very important when you're looking at diffusion of ideas or product innovations or a concept in a network, and it gives you an idea of when these new websites or email address came in. Here you can get a contribute index curve plot where you can actually select individual users. A Betweenness curve plot, again, by selecting individual users. And then you can actually get a group message sent and received curve plot, so it gives you an idea of the number over time. And then you can color the nodes by Betweenness centrality. You can color the nodes by degree. Another favorite is the social structure, which is really a combination of time and by intensity, as well as the amount of activity that is going on. You get a contribution index as well. And then you can click on this and you can kind of rotate this in 3 dimensions. So that will really take us now to the fourth stage, the optional, to export it via the network map in the third stage under the measure stage, or use Navicat directly. So if we go back to the export options between the static versus dynamic, the dynamic will give you 2 options to export actors betweenness centrality and actors degree centrality. You have several more under the dynamic. In any case, either static or the dynamic, you're always going to get on a saved menu based upon what you want, saved it into a file. So then the other option is to actually use Navicat directly. There's actually kind of 3 different ways you can use Navicat. You can use the commands to do it through the database here, or you can use the wizard to import or export things on the wizard, or you can simply copy and paste by selecting the data directly from a data table. So coming back to our fundamental question, how does Condor work? Really, you need to understand again some basic social network concept and terms, and finally also to know how those forms work. So this is a really kind of summary of that kind of complexity under the hood of Condor to help you navigate through. For the most part, you do your harvesting throughout those 6 basic forms. You use the second stage to kind of filter or subset it, and then you get to the third stage where you have a network map drawn, and you use the network mapping options of play, measure, view, bipartite, and control to further subset and refine your analysis. And if you desire, you can export the data directly from the network measure maps or from using Navicat directly with your favorite statistical program, other semantic or social network. Hopefully that gives you a broad overview of how Condor works from a user point of view, and you're able to have a better idea of navigating through the Condor forms and subforms. Enjoy.